Cool, well, we'll get started. So today we're having a look at some of the new features that we've added to PAROT recently, namely the walkthroughs, the relative growth index, and gateway reporting. So we will start off with a little bit of housekeeping. So first of all, I'll introduce myself. My name's Jake Wills. I went to uni, so I get to put some letters behind my name, namely a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics and Statistics, or Statistics, sorry, no, just Statistics. Did I do mathematics? Yeah, I did mathematics as well, somewhere in there. I think it was a major in statistics and a minor in mathematics, and a graduate diploma in teaching. My background is I was a teacher for 11 years before stepping out of the classroom at the end of last year. I was the original developer of Assay, and I have also built NZ Grapher. I've been working on PAROT since 2021 and have also launched Report It this year, which is a health and safety reporting tool. So things for this webinar, as we go through the session today, you should be able to put questions into the chat. I'll do my best to answer them as we go, so feel free to chuck things in there. I have also shared the slides sharing the slides into the chat now as well, so that you'll be able to view them. I'm aiming to be done well before 4:15, but if you want to hang around after we finish and ask questions, that's totally okay. And we're recording this session so that people who can't make it today are still able to come back and watch it later. So today we're going to cover the walkthroughs, relative growth index, and gateway. So we'll start off with walkthroughs. So to set up walkthroughs, you go into the admin settings and you click on walkthrough settings, which is in the bottom right-hand corner down here. From there, you'll get a screen that looks like this. If you want to turn it on so your teachers and staff can access it, you need to tick that enable walkthrough on the teacher dashboard. And then there is a default walkthrough form created for you, but you can create as many different forms as you want. Some schools have got it set up so that they've got a kind of a short walkthrough and then a full observation. You can also choose what classes you're just not ever going to do observations for, so they don't clutter up the list. So in this example, we've taken out form time. And then you can also choose who are the walkthrough admins. Those people can see all of the walkthroughs across all of the forms, so that, basically they can see everything. So you'll only want a few people to have access to that. So editing a form, there's quite a lot of customization that you can do in the forms to tweak them for what you want there. You can give it a name. So by default, it's just, this one's just called the default walkthrough. You can add who's going to be doing the observation. So it might be SMT, it might be HOD. You might run a buddy system. So it might be a buddy, various different options. You can basically put as many in as you want there. And that just helps you categorize them later on. Focus areas, it may be that you're doing some observations where you're focusing on, learning intentions, or you're focusing on routines, or whatever. You can bring that in. Then there are quantitative checklist rows. So these are things where we're looking at, how strong evidence or little evidence. So you can basically choose your columns there and your rows here, and then it gives you a tick box grid between them. You can give observational instructions. So it might be you give a bit of a blurb about what people should be looking for when they're doing an observation, and then at the bottom there is details on the qualitative. So basically the blurbs that you can write, and you can choose which ones of them you want on or off. So once you've got it all set up, what does that end up looking like? Well, you get this new walkthroughs button on the teacher dashboard. And from there, you can come in, you can see the observations that you've done. And you can also see the observations on you. And then there is another tab, which is all observations, which if you're the super user, you can see that. The final one is the analysis. So you can slice and dice the data on the observations. You can see who's been doing observations, who's been receiving observations, and you can group that by department, or you can slice it by focus area or department, or year or term or week, or you can basically try and help make sure that people are doing the observations that they're supposed to be doing. And again, all of these graphs can be copied and downloaded as per the other areas of PAROT. So what does it look like when you come to fill in the observation? It doesn't fit nicely on one like nice landscape screen when I was filling it in. So we've got two screenshots here. So we've got the walkthrough. So you've got you choose your role. Sometimes there might be a couple of people doing an observation. So it might be a couple of HODs are walking around together or something like that. So you can say who you are with. You can either observe one or multiple classes. So it might be that you were observing, you're doing a walkthrough of like 5 people in your department, or it might be that you're just doing it for one person. So it supports one or multiple. And from that classes, it will automatically choose a learning area, which is the department that those classes fit in, but you can manually override that as well. The focus area is the drop down from the things that we had before. And there's a little snapshot of, when were you there during the lesson? Were you there in the beginning, the middle, the end, or were you there for the whole lesson? And then we've got our grid of ticks and, where do we feel like we're sitting with each of these? And then you've got qualitative feedback. And so we had the strengths, the areas of improvement, and other comments turned on. And then there is the option of whether or not you publish that to the teacher. So with if we come back to here, with the list of observations, you can either have them private, so where they're only visible to the person doing the observation, or you can make them published so that the teacher can see them. Depending on how you're running things in the school, depends on whether or not you're going to want to tick that box. And once you've done them, they will end up back in here, and you can choose to edit them later, or if you really want to, you might want to delete some if you're putting in some as a test. So that's our walkthrough module. Before I move on from that, does anyone have any questions in and around that? Feel free to chuck them in the chat or unmute yourself and ask. Cool. Well, if you think of anything else as we go, please do just pop something in the chat there. Next up, we are going to look at relative growth. So the relative growth index is something we've built into PAROT to shift the focus away from absolute outcomes to basically looking at progress, or how much growth have they made relative to where they started. So it measures actual progress instead of kind of the static endpoint. It does a comparison to a baseline. So the baseline is for students against basically students who started off similar to them, and there's a few different baselines that we can use. And to access this, you can go to achievement analysis, and then you'll find relative growth in the top bar there. So there's basically 4 parts to this. So step 1 or step A is finding the baseline. So a student's academic baseline is where we have their starting point at, and we can do this one of 2 ways, and you can use multiple models inside this. The first one is using PAT Stay9s as a baseline. So it looks at the maths and reading Stay9s, or looking at the NCEA GSA, which is basically a GPA, where you've got 4 points for an excellence, 3 points for a merit, 2 points for an achieved, and 0 points for a not achieved. And so you could use your year 11 results to predict your year 12 results. So then from that, we look at, based on their starting point, where would we expect them to end up based on the GPA or the GSA. And so you can either use the PAT or the NCA to predict what the GSA would be. And then we build that expectation line. So this will plot a nice big scatter graph basically of all of the data. And then we're looking at where we sit relative to that. And we do that based on how strong the model is. So the stronger the model is, the more, the smaller the distance the student will need to be above or below that line for it to show that they're making greater progress than expected or less progress than expected. And so we use basically a Z score to capture that. And there's some math stuff there, and there's some more math stuff in the guides if you are curious about how the model works. But basically that gives us 3 categories. We've got accelerated progress, where the the score that the student gets is greater than 1, and that's roughly the top 16% of a cohort. Then you've got your expected progress. That's where students' Z scores between -1 and 1, and then you've got your slower progress, which is where the Z score is less than 1. So that would be roughly the bottom 16%. Quick note when you're looking at the data though, as you go through the year, like we're halfway through the year, obviously students at this point in the year have done internals, but they haven't really done any externals, with the CAA being the one exception to that. So in general, we find that students do better in internals than externals, so that can give an inflated look of your GSA, particularly because also a lot of not achieves don't get put in until later in the year when, you know, we're actually confirming that the kids haven't done it. So that can affect things as you're kind of going through the year. So it's just something to be aware of. So filters and controls, there's a few different filters on here. You can choose which model you're wanting to look at, and I'll show you how we train the different models in a minute. You can look at cohorts and attendance. So you can look at the year you're looking at, and whether or not the students are attending on the 1st of July, the 30th of November, or have 80% more attendance. So you can kind of filter it down to just the students you want to look at. And you can also filter by ethnicity, gender, MOE type, tutors, or specific IDs. So what does this end up looking like? So the first one that we've got here is we've got a relative growth for, this is looking at NCA level 2 to level 3. So up here, you've got the different models that you can choose. So what we've got here is on the x-axis is you've got their baseline. So what you would expect, and on the, what they got in their, in this case, level 2, and this here has got where the line would be what we'd predict to happen in level 3, and this here is what's actually happened in level 3. So we're looking at 2025 data, so we've got a full year's worth of data. These students here are students that perform below expectation, the ones in the red dot. The students in blue dots are the ones that performed above expectations, or made accelerated growth. You can see the details on the model here. So you can see the standard error, which is gives an indication of how strong the model is, and also the R-squared value, which is basically, in this particular data set, we're saying that 59% of the variation in the level 3 results can be explained by the level 2 results. And it's telling you how many students you're dealing with and those sorts of things. So that's looking at a scatter plot, and you've got your normal kind of filters here on the left-hand side. You can also filter down, so you're looking at just an individual subject. So I think I've got, here we go, I've got an example here where you look at just going from level 12 accounting to, level 2 accounting to level 3 accounting. There's a few other ways that you can view the data though. So you can look at it as a strip graph. When you're looking at it as a strip graph, you can split by year, gender, or attendance brackets. One of the things we're looking at adding soon is being able to split by department or class or teacher, but that requires a bit of extra work with setup because we need to know what the natural progressions are between courses. So you can look at that either as a strip graph, or the other one that we've just added in is a divergent strip graph, which allows you to quite easily see those shifts. So we can see here you've kind of got those two are reasonably similar. This one's definitely shifted further to the right. We're seeing more progress overall. Then you can also view it as tables. So the table gives you a list of all of the students. I've obviously anonymized all of this, but you can see what their baseline score was, what their actual score was, and what was predicted, therefore what their relative growth index was, and whether or not they're making accelerated progress or not. Or you can view that as a category list. So it just gives you a list of the ones that have slower progress, expected progress, or accelerated progress. So how do we set this all up? In order to set this up, we are training the data just on your school. PAROT doesn't share data between schools. So this is basically training how are your kids doing compared to how do your kids in general do. It's not looking at any national data, it's just looking at your school. in order to look at, wider than that, we'd need to get agreements from everyone to share their data, which isn't something we do at PAROT. So to do this, you need to tick the Enable Progress module, and then there is a Settings button there. When you go into the settings, this is where you're able to train the models. So you can choose the different models you want to train. You can look at PAT to level 1, 2, or 3, or NCA level 1 to 2, or level 2 to 3. Now, looking at this particular school, we've got data back to 2017. Some of the models are pretty good, like these ones here, which are your level 1 to level 2 and level 2 to level 3. We're accounting for 50 to 60% of the variation. Some of these PATs, like particularly the PAT to level 3 predictor, is particularly poor. The PAT to level 1 isn't, it's okay. We're accounting for about 30% of the variation, but I really wouldn't think that, using PAT to predict your level 3 results is particularly good for this particular school. Now, each school will vary a little bit. So you go and build the models, and then you can go, actually, cool, this is a good, model to use, or no, this one really isn't a good model to use. So that is the relative growth index. Before I move on from that, does anyone have any questions about the relative growth index? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask if you do, or drop a question in the chat. Cool. Well, the final thing for today is gateway reporting. So in admin settings, under user permissions, you can choose which users have access to gateway, because you're probably only wanting a couple of people to have access to gateway, and you just tick that little tick box next to the person's name under gateway access. This adds a gateway button onto the main screen. From there are 3 screens. There is the summary screen. I've obviously blanked out all of the students in this, but you'd be able to see the students, their first name and their last name, and who the employer that they're tagged with is, how many credits they're entered in for, and how many they've passed. And there's also the buttons here to download the gateway actuals and the standard actuals for that you need to upload to TEC at the end of the year. And it also records the number of credits entered and passed per student. So just those key stats, because obviously that's something that when you're running the gateway program, you want to make sure you're keeping an eye on. So how does it pull all of that data together? It's a nice simple form. So you come to the students, you can find any kid just using the normal search criteria there. You click whether or not you want to include them. If you accidentally include one, just come in and untick it and it will exclude them. It automatically fills in some of the details, like their NSN, date of birth, ethnicity, and gender. And then you've got some free text fields and most of them are drop downs for the different categories of data that you need to include. And then at the bottom is a list of all of the standards that the student has done, with a little tick box next to them as to whether or not they should be included in the gateway reporting. And then you've got the employers screen, where you just come in, you add in the NZBN if you know it, because what am I trying to say? TEC likes to collect that if you can, and then the employer name, which is the one that you use internally, so you can see what the employer is. And then if you want to add or delete, if you want to delete them, you can hit the delete button, and if you click view students, it just gives you a list of the students that are tagged to that employer. And that's basically all there is to Gateway. It's just to streamline that reporting process to TEC. The feedback I got from a few people is that some schools were spending lots of money just to get that reporting. So I was able to build it in and make it nice and easy for you guys. So does anyone have any questions about anything that we have covered today? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or chuck a comment in the chat. I was told last time I moved on too quickly from the section, so I'm just going to make us all sit around awkwardly for a moment in case there is anyone that does want to ask anything. But while we're thinking about, or if you're thinking or typing, one of the things I would find it really useful if you could do, and I'll pop a link to this in the, here we go, copy link. I will paste a link into the chat. I would love it if you could spend 30 seconds filling in my survey. It helps me work out what works well with these sessions, what doesn't work well, so that we can make them more useful going forward. And just a reminder that there is development voting. So on the main screen, there's this development planning screen. You can vote for the features that you would like to see most. And also in that feedback survey that I'll put a link through to you, you can talk about the things that you'd like to see future webinars on, which helps me plan them appropriately. And there is also a guides section on the website, which I'll be putting a recording of this. There's recordings of all of the other webinars, and there's a bunch of guides that we've been working on building up over time as well. Cool, well, that's us for today. If anyone's got any questions and wants to hang around and ask them, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, that's us. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon.